reserve forests, which are like a lot more degraded than the protected area. And this area has had a lot of history of logging in the past. I'll come to that a bit later. And it is also kind of in the foothill forest, like, the lowland areas, which are just, bordering Assam. And one of the big tiger reserves that borders Pake is the Nameri Tiger Reserve. And this is part of this whole coming elephant reserve landscape, a large complex of forests, which includes different forests under different kinds of protection. So the background to, I just wanted to give a bit of background to why, what was our understanding of the system and the area before we started doing some restoration. Um, so my work has been largely on ecological studies on hornbills, looking at various aspects of their biology, as well as their role as seed dispersers. In the earlier times, I've also done some research looking at the impact of logging on squirrels and primates. We've done a whole range of, some other studies looking at other seed predators in the system, which are these terrestrial rodents. And I've done my master's, my BSc in botany, though that didn't really teach me much about trees in the forest and knowing species. And actually I started learning trees and being interested in trees only after I did my master's in wildlife ecology in the Wildlife Institute of India. And even then I didn't know much. So it's taken many years, but I just love plants and trees. And so a large part of our work has been also looking at, it's not just the animals, we also look at vegetation composition and structure. So we already have a lot of information and understanding of the vegetation composition and structure of this area. And we also began plant phenology studies from the perspective originally of hornbills, but also to try and understand the seasonal patterns of flowering and fruiting of different tree species in the forest, especially based on dispersal mode. That is, animal dispersed species as well as wind dispersed species. And a large part of our research has also tried to look at understanding tree frugivore interactions, largely hornbills, but also we've looked at other birds, in terms of their role as seed dispersers and in terms of frugivory. And this little, graph shows you that there's many, many seed dispersers in these forests. There's bats, there's hornbills, there's 4 species of hornbills. There's mammals like barking deer and civets. There are also secondary seed dispersers like terrestrial rodents, forest rodents. And there are a lot of beautiful tree species with large seeded fruits, which hornbills and many other mammals or birds disperse. And so that was the background to this. And we also, so basically this also lists some of the work that we've done over the years in knowing the system. And one of the larger components of our work is also looking at monitoring of the hornbill nests and the roosts to understand any changes that are happening. And we also have a long-term tree phenology monitoring project. So we now have data for about 14 years on the seasonal fruiting and annual fruiting and flowering patterns and leafing patterns of a set of species. Um, so some of my early studies established that 78% of the tree species in Pake Tiger Reserve are animal dispersed and the remaining are mechanically dispersed. And out of that, in those years of studying hornbill diet and all that, we also established that about 90 fruit species were recorded in the diet from Pake. Of course, now I think there are lots more species that we know are eaten by hornbills, which we had not recorded earlier. But it came to about 26% of tree species at that time, earlier when we had done that work. And this we'll just again just tell you a bit about hornbills, show you some hornbills and trees in that area. And how hornbills handle fruits and how they act as. Divya and Sridhar also spoke about this. Divya's work has also been on hornbills. So these are hornbills flying, wreathed hornbills flying to the roost sites, which are actually, along the, I'll just go ahead. Yeah, which are, these roost sites are actually along the rivers, the perennial streams and rivers, and they actually roost away from the forest on these tall trees of Bombaxiba or Albizia. And they drop a lot of seeds when they are roosting in these places. But I'll come to all that later. But yeah, so that was one of the background. But
Aparajita,
yeah,
sorry to disturb. You'll just have to increase the volume of the video because there's no audio that we could listen to.
which video? The earlier video
Both
I played?
videos. Both
Both the
videos.
videos. Okay,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
I don't know how to increase. Anyway, the videos are over. There's only a
Okay.
deforestation video. And anyway, I'm speaking. So it's, yeah. So, okay. So, yeah, but, that is showing some forests which looked very well protected and almost pristine. But generally, in all of you may be aware that, there's a huge forest crisis of forest loss, especially in the Asian tropics. And, you know, um, many of these areas are being transformed, right? And Asia has the highest rates of forest loss. And Northeast India, there's a lot of data from Global Forest Watch, as well as our own Forest Survey of India's data that there's been loss of forest cover in Northeast India in the last decade, quite significant due to various factors. And these are largely, all of I mean, many of you will know what these are, but illegal logging is a huge issue. And, like in South American areas or in Southeast Asia, illegal logging comes with a lot of it opens up areas which are, you know, very good for wildlife, and there's no governance in some of these areas, very well protected kind of systems, unlike, say, Western Ghats or some other parts of India where it's much better. There are reasons why there is much more sort of, so in many areas, a free for all happening, right, in terms of forest loss in parts of Northeast India. And some places it's because also the ownership and governance is not clear. And yeah, and there's also needs of people and all that, and political and social reasons, issues why encroachment happens in some areas. And there is poor law enforcement. So yeah, so around Parque Tiger Reserve, while Parque Tiger Reserve is much better protected, it has also had a history of human use, and it was declared in 1978 as a sanctuary, and after that, much later, as a tiger reserve. But it had logging in parts of its area before, when it was a reserve forest. Then there's also settlements which existed in the past in some places. Papum Reserve Forest, which is adjoining Parque Tiger Reserve, is part of this larger area called the Kelong Forest Division. And if you see to the left of this map, there's a place, there's Doimara Reserve Forest. So that is another area. Now, all these areas were under heavy logging in the 90s, especially. There were lots of timber mills operating there. When I first came to study in 95, was when the big logging was happening in the states of Arunachal Pradesh and Assam and all these places, in other states of Northeast. And there was a lot of concern, and somebody filed a PIL. And many of you might be aware that there was a Supreme Court judgment that is known as, I mean, that's part of this Godavarman case. But after that, basically the illegal, the logging, this was legal, by the way, some parts of it. But even when there's legal logging, there is a a lot of, even if the permits are for one tree, people would cut up to 20 trees if that happened. And the thing is that ultimately the Supreme Court banned logging in 96. And so these forests got a bit of respite for the, seemingly they got a respite for some years. But again, in, soon after, again after 2005 or so, there's been, sort of illegal logging happening, even though officially it's been banned. And these have exacerbated in the last few years again. And the story is even worse lower down in Assam. So this is the landscape. Oh, I forgot to put those old pictures. Okay, so I had some old pictures of the area before in 1995. And, you'd like weep because, it's this memory of the landscape that you have. In 95, these areas were forested and there was trees, nest trees of hornbills that I knew. And then over the years, I saw it all disappear. And this is, of course, looking towards the Assam side from Arunachal. So a lot of the boundaries of near, the deforestation also started coming into the Arunachal side in the later years. And of course, apart from like obvious like clearing and large scale deforestation, there's also degradation with the, taking out of timber from the forest. And we will play another video and I hope the volume will be better, but I don't know whether, yeah, I hope, wait, yeah. In the last decade, from 95 onwards, was a huge deforestation happened towards Shonitpur district in the adjoining Assam side, where a large chunk of forest has disappeared. Over the years, as we monitored the nests in the tiger reserve, as the number of nest trees in tiger reserve increased, the few nests that we knew in the area either cut down or they were abandoned and disturbed. The birds were not successful nesting there. We felt that there was a need to try and protect the hornbill habitat outside the park. Okay, these are a bit abrupt. I'm sorry, 1 minute. In the last decade from 9. Okay, yeah. So this was the background to our starting one initiative called the Hornbill Nest Adoption Program. So, when I said Shonitpur district, it's very famous and well known that Shonitpur district lost more than around 400 square kilometers in 15 years. It's documented as the highest deforestation, and this is part of this larger Kameng Elephant Reserve. And it happened because of socio-political reasons. Certain community were, which was claiming this area as their homeland in the North Bank, came from other districts and took over and converted a lot of the forest areas and into settlements and agricultural land. And that's why the deforestation happened there in the Assam side. But then also along with that, there was illegal logging and degradation happening. So we were monitoring the nests in the park for a long time, hornbill nests, and we realized that there was a lot of nests outside, which were hornbills don't know boundaries and hornbills move over large areas. So the reserve forest areas, all the nests were either getting disturbed or being cut down. So we started this program called the Hornbill Nest Adoption Program, in which we tried to involve, it was a partnership. It's based on somebody else has done it in Thailand before, Dr. Pillai Punswad, where we, ask people to adopt hornbill nests of different species of hornbills, and then we try to protect these hornbill nest trees and the habitat. So the idea was to try to protect them in the areas outside. So the concept is, shared parenting. So there's a local guardian who is the local person from the Nishi tribe in that area. And of course, the hornbill parents themselves who look after the chicks. But there's also urban citizens. Well, it need not be urban, because later we got a lot of people locally also to support the program financially, who adopt a nest, and they sort of give money for protecting the nest trees. I'm sorry, for employing the local people and other activities in the program. I don't want to go into too much detail because that's a separate conversation. I'm just bringing you to the why we began the restoration program. This was the team in the initial years when we began. And as we started that work, we realized that it was a natural corollary of that program that we also needed to sort of do some restoration in this landscape, and so some of this I've already mentioned, what is written on the slide, but there was a lot of degraded patches, and these are important areas for a host of wildlife, and we wanted to start a restoration project. And okay, so this is repetition, but yeah, basically outside the tiger reserve, there was the alarming deforestation in the reserve forest, both in Assam as well as beginning in the Arunachal side. And inside the tiger reserve, because of past logging, there were degraded forest patches, and there was heavy weed infestation in places and poor regeneration of native trees. So it's not that inside the park it's always very good, the natural regeneration or just protection itself can help recover the forest. So the goals of our this is how our restoration program began. And we also had inspiration from what our colleagues, Divya and Sridhar, had already been doing for so many years, So there was, learnings from them and talking to them and finding out about how they started and all that. So the goals were restoration of degraded forests, mainly in the reserve forest, where we were trying to protect hornbills now through the nest adoption program, and also trying to do some restoration in the small degraded patches in the protected area. The third goal actually also was that a lot of local people would want, saplings of a lot of species that they want to grow. And here, local people actually try to grow timber species which are economically important for them. And everybody wants native species here. So that's not really a problem. Apart from okay, except for Sagun, which is teak. They do ask for teak, which is not a native species in this region. But apart from that, a lot of ecologically important species are also considered important by local people. So we wanted to be able to provide some of these. And we will talk about some of that later. A fourth goal was also outreach and awareness and training to other people on this. And of course, some of this goal has evolved. This is some goal that we've thought about later as we realize that our efforts can only do so much. So we thought it'll be important to share a lot of things with others who may be able to take it forward in other areas. Yeah. So at the inception of the project actually began with some discussions with a forest department official who was a ranger in that area, territorial ranger, who was actually very interested and helpful. And he provided us nursery space, a very small space, but we began like that. In fact, even some initial funding and labor and staff he provided. Unfortunately, soon after he left, and we could not make it a much more, how will I say, formal collaboration with the territorial department, which has actually hampered our later effort. But we hope to be able to do that more properly from this year onwards. So, okay, so now it's Nupur's turn to speak about some of the actual work. Hello?
Yeah. I'll start sharing. I think you'll have to
unshare. Yeah, I'll stop sharing.
Okay. Is my screen visible?
Not yet.
Is it visible now?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Prajita, for a brief summary. And now I think most of these points must have and actually have been covered in the previous talks, but I would still briefly touch upon some of them for if there are new audience that have joined today. So I'll start with why is ecological restoration essential and what is it? So to confront the crisis of increasing degraded landscapes and also the tropical forest destruction that's happening, ecological restoration is very crucial. It is not only important for biodiversity conservation and also for better land management, but if you think of it as on a broader scale, it's also essential for climate change mitigation. So what is ecological restoration? So it's a simple definition given by Society of Ecological Restoration. And they say that it's a process of assisting the recovery of an ecosystem that has been degraded, damaged, or destroyed. So yeah, so another important thing that I would like to bring to your notice is that ecological restoration is also essential in protected areas, and because many of these protected areas they also come with a history of past land use, and even these conservation areas have been logged by for the former inhabitants or they have been cleared for agriculture and other land use. So if they are to fulfill their role of the last wildlife refuges, the forest restoration is also needed in these areas. And this study by Lawrence et al. Also suggests that it says that ecological condition in many of the protected areas is degrading, and there has been increase in the disturbance causing gills, there's an increase in invasive species, pioneer species, and many of the generalist plant species. And also there's a depletion of large seeded species that are also a part of a primary forest. So there are different methods of ecological restoration, one being the passive and the other an active form of restoration. Passive restoration is basically assisting the natural regeneration of a forest, and this can be done by getting information on the factors that limit the regeneration. Those can be identified, and then eventually we can various interventions can be implemented to overcome these limitations to regeneration. And these can include various interventions like weeding or prevention of livestock grazing or providing the existing saplings with fertilizers, which would in a way assist their growth. And the other way is of active restoration, where very much actively and very intensive human intervention is essential. And there has been a constant debate between different ecological restoration practitioners that whether tree planting is always essential and the passive restoration is sufficient to revive the degraded. And there is no doubt that natural regeneration, the assistive or the passive restoration is very simple and it's also cost effective, but it usually operates on trees that are already present in the landscape. So these usually represent only a small fraction of the total trees that are present in the natural tropical forests. Therefore, for full recovery, some tree planting is usually necessary, and it is not always feasible to plant all the many hundreds of species that are present, or those that were there formerly, but and that is not even essential. So in a way, some areas do require active interventions, and in our case we have been doing active restoration as of now. And I've listed some of the methods or the strategies that are required to achieve or to carry out active restoration, which will be describing in detail in the coming slides. So some of the things that are required for an active restoration practice is, the first step is recognizing the forest type. And recognizing the forest type is very much critical for the restoration projects and the success of those efforts. Forest restoration is, it in a way directs and accelerates the forest succession. And eventually we try and recreate the original forest ecosystems as closely as possible. And if we know the forest type, we would also get to know about the species that grow in these forests. And based on the forest type, what species can be planted where is the is what we come to know by knowing the forest type. And it also determines which species can be grown in the nurseries. So in a way, like where biodiversity conservation is a major management priority, the composition of these original forests provides a benchmark, and against which we, sort of track the progress of our restoration in an area. So coming to the species selection. So this was covered in Divya Shankar's talk, but I'll just touch upon it briefly. So not only understanding the forest type is essential, but it will also, understanding the forest type will give you an idea of the species that are present there. And you will also come to know what management strategies to be applied. So in many areas where the deforestation that has happened must have happened several decades ago, and so determining the original forest composition becomes difficult. So during these time, you can rely on the local traditional knowledge from the landscape, or you can also refer to floras that are present for the particular region. Like in our case, we have various flora of Assam, Bhutan, which we refer to when required. And in our case, also we had, like Aprajita mentioned, there were lots of past studies that have happened in the landscape and done by Aprajita, which in sort of, gave us an idea of the species present in the landscape. So we could go back to those studies, and we could sort of have a list of species that we could start off our restoration efforts with. So coming to site selection, it can be, it depends on when you select a site, you have to have an idea of the history of the land use. And this can be obtained from the people living in the area, and also you can take help from the forest department. And Google Earth imagery can also be useful in getting to know about the history, or the, you can see when the degradation must have started in those areas. So things like steepness of a site and the susceptibility of soil erosion. So if the site is very steep, so there are different management strategies or restoration strategies that you will have to follow. Like, for example, construction of bunds or things like that, or the species will also depend on the type of the site. The other thing is accessibility, because the site accessibility is an important point to be taken into consideration, because while planting, we usually do planting at the onset of monsoon, and there are many sites which become inaccessible during those times. So it is very transport so many saplings to those areas. And things like if there are for natural forest regeneration, or sources of natural forest are surrounding the site, can play an important role in deciding on how many species can be planted. At our sites, mostly we have faced issues with, there are lots of weeds that grow, that we have seen growing in these degraded patches. And weeds like Chromalena, Ageratum, Mycenia we have been seeing growing in the open patches that we have done restoration in. And the other point is regarding the soil conditions. It is in our case, we haven't much done soil analysis or intensive soil analysis, I can say. But most of these sites, they are the where we have done restoration, they have these tropical soils, mostly sandy, loamy soils, and the condition wasn't that degraded, for which we would have to have done some interventions to improve the soil conditions. But we eventually plan to do so, because there are some sites where the looking at the soil will be very useful for better survival and growth. So there are different restoration strategies. These were also covered in Divya Shankar's talk. So I'll just talk about them in brief. So nurse species planting is basically, there are certain species where the level of degradation in an area is very low. So certain species that can be planted, which would just shade out the weeds and assist the regeneration can be done. There are other methods like framework species method. So this involves, there are species that are carefully selected from the set of species that are there. And mostly these are 20 to 30 species that are planted in an area, which eventually, improve the condition, or, shade out and grow very fast and shade out the weeds. So that is framework species method. And the other method is maximum diversity method, which we have been following in our area. Here, lots of species, like the species number is higher, and there is a lot of mix of small seeded, large seeded species, pioneer to climax seed species, and a mix of these species that is planted. And in a way, this accelerates the process of recovery. So for a successful restoration project, it is very much essential to have a good set of saplings that can be planted, which would eventually result or give you the expected result. So seed collection basically is very much essential for the restoration, and in a way, like, what we follow is, we don't try and disrupt the natural regeneration that's already present in a forest. So we try and collect seeds from the roadsides or different trails that are there inside the forest, or from the riverbeds. So that is where we try to collect seeds from. And to maximize the genetic diversity, we also try and collect seeds from below different parent trees, but we don't collect it in large numbers, only less. We try and not to collect them in large numbers, and also we try and collect seeds from different nests and roost sites of hornbills. Again, we don't try and collect all the seeds that have fallen there, but try to take a small portion, which would be essential for our nursery. These are some of the pictures of, these are an important set of species for various mammals and birds in this landscape. And we have been growing these in our nursery. So there are various, intensive nursery activities that are essential, and the work in the nursery goes year round. And in our site, we have local field staff from around the area where we do restoration, and then they have been trained in all these activities. So there are different activities like seed grading that happens once the seeds are collected. Then there are different pre-sowing treatments that we have to do. And once the seeds are sown, they have been transplanted to a bigger pot, there are also other important things that we have to do. We have to take care of the saplings even after transplanting, until they grow up to be suitable for or grow up to be of a size that is suitable for planting. So these were some of the nursery activities. And moving on to the planting activities. So after the site selection after the site is selected, what we do is we have to, depending on the site, if the site is covered with weeds, then we have to get rid of the weeds. And if they are not very, you know, weeds that have very deep roots, the clearing of the weeds can happen uh, very easily. Like, you know, the mycenia only used with the use of hand machetes can be cleared. And we don't have to do it very much prior or very long before planting, but it can happen 2 to 3 weeks before the planting activity or the planting event is to happen. Then digging pits. So here, the distance between the pits and the size of the pits, the size of the pits depends on the size of the pots that you have at the nursery, and the distance is decided upon the presence of naturally regenerating saplings in those in the site. And based on that, mostly it is done. If there is very less regeneration, then mostly 1.8 to 2 meters of a distance is kept between different between the saplings. And lots of care, like, you know, while transporting the saplings have to be taken very carefully. And we also label the plants after planting for further monitoring. So the maintenance and monitoring part. So it is not only for restoration, it is not only essential to, you know, plant saplings and, you know, let them grow by themselves, but there is a lot of maintenance and maintenance that goes into it. Like at our sites, we have to do weeding frequently at our sites. And here we remove the weedy undergrowths around the undergrowth around the saplings. And also it has to be done frequently, mostly in the rainy season, or depending upon the growth of the weeds in your area. So mostly it is not done in the dry season, as the saplings may become prone to desiccation. And at our sites, we also do monitoring. So in a way, we've been monitoring survival for many years, since the inception. Since we did our first planting, but we have also recently started measuring the growth of the planted saplings, and these, you know, provide us with uh, information on how the species are doing, and help us in the future restoration efforts. So in our area, what we have done so far at the nurseries, we have grown the nursery has grown quite a bit, and we had started with 25 species in 2014, and now we have 72 native tree species that we have been growing. And like Aprajita said, based on her studies, uh, most of the species in the landscape, like 78% of them are animal dispersed, and some are wind dispersed. So we have been trying to have that at our nursery as well. And we have also been growing various economically important species as well for the local communities. So this was the nursery in 2014. And this was a very, I can say, a small area that was provided to us by the forest department. It was around 600 square meters. And initially we started off on a small scale. And eventually we, in 2019 and the end of 2019, we shifted our nursery to a bigger area, which had, not only the area was bigger, but it also had better water facilities. And we had to fence it because there is a lot of elephant activity in the villages surrounding Parke Tiger Reserve. So yeah, so these are some images from the new nursery. And here are some saplings that we grow at our nursery. So yeah, many of these are important for the locals, like Livistona jenkinsiana is very much useful for the locals, as they use it for thatching the roofs of their houses. Tetramelis is important nesting tree for hornbills, and the others are also very important for this landscape. So coming to the sites, so there are different sites that we have done restoration. So far, we have done it inside the Pake Tiger Reserve, as well as in the RF. There are some sites where we were able to do restoration, and the tea states of Assam and privately owned farmlands in Assam is where we have also tried doing restoration. Although we started off with the hope to revive the areas in the reserve forest, but we did face some issues pertaining to the land claimed by the locals, which because of which we haven't been able to do much intensive restoration in these areas yet, but we plan on doing that soon. So these are some of the sites, Google Earth images of some of the sites. So in the first to the left, if you see, it's a site in the Doimara RF, which falls under the territorial forest division, and the ranger had approached us, and you can see that it's quite degraded, the area, and the ranger had approached us to carry out some restoration activities as it is an important elephant part of important elephant corridor as well. So we have done that, and initially the forest department also did the maintenance activities after the planting was done. But yeah, there were issues which I'll be talking about in the later slides. The site to the right, top right, you can see is the site inside Pake Tiger Reserve. This was maintained by the forest department for many years as a grassland, and eventually they wanted to start, plant some trees in that area. But yeah, they sort of, the species selection that they some species also they had planted. There were species like guava and some other fruit tree species that they were planning to plant in that area. But eventually we approached them and we tried and convinced them to sort of let us plant a different set of native species that we have been growing at our nursery. And below there's this site which is a relocated village site from inside Pake Tiger Reserve. So it also showed very high weed infestation, because it was inhabited by humans before, and yeah, it was a sort of a difficult site in terms of accessibility. Many of the saplings had to be carried across the river to the site. Yeah, so these are some of the sites. So talking about our restoration efforts, the project was initiated in 2014, and in 2016 we did our first planting. We have grown some to 28,000 saplings of 72 species in these 6 years, and we have been able to sort of cover 12 hectares of degraded patches so far. And the survival across different sites it has ranged from 30 to 70% after 2 to 3 years of planting. Here you can see the happy faces after the planting event was done. So from 2016 and 2018. So if I have to tell you about the survival at different sites, so different sites behave differently based on the conditions, like previous conditions. Areas, it also depends on the wildlife activity in those areas, and a lot of come into play. So we have like a range of survival percent, and here you can see of the sites which I mentioned earlier. It is a relocated village site, which shows because there was a lot of elephant activity, not only elephant but other wild herbivore activity in that area, and also things like uh, sort of had to construct a road through our restoration plot, which is resulted in a lot of mortality. that happened here. The Tipi plot, like I mentioned, that in the Doimara RF, it also is a disputed land and it has land ownership issues. So many of our saplings were chopped off. And there is, as I said, it's an important elephant corridor. So there's the elephant activity is also quite high in this area. Whereas like there are sites like the tea states where the survival is very high. We have seen 60 to 70% survival after 3 years at one of the sites that was planted in 2017. And the reason being that these areas, as you can see in the picture, they're fenced. And they also to increase the survival, the success of the planting. You can see to the right how the weeds have been cleared. They even provide them with fertilizers from time to time and also water them. So it depends on the efforts also, and also the how protected or how a particular site is. Yeah, so just to give you an idea of how the survival changes that happened in the tea state site. In 3 years, we have seen that sort of during there's an initial mortality where you can see after 6 months there's 20 that was observed, but eventually the survival, I mean the number has sort of stabilized after a point. So these are pictures from the sites which were taken after a year when the planting was done. And you can see some of the saplings have grown really tall. And this is one of our sites which was planted in 2017. So some of the pictures from that site 1 year after planting. And again, some more pictures here. You can see at the Tetramelis nudiflora tree, which has grown. I mean, good has grown. I can call it a tree now. After 3 years of planting, it has grown very tall. And so here on the right, you can see the same sapling after 3 years. So I'd like to tell you about the site where we did planting in 2018, where we had planted 3,022 saplings of 50 species. And we tried to monitor the survival of 32 species out of the 50 that were planted, and also growth rate of 9 species were measured. So in this small study, what our key findings were that there was a lot of interspecies specific and also we looked at seasonal variation. So there was a lot of seasonal variation in terms of survival and growth rate for different species. And there was accelerated growth in height as well as diameter in the second wet season. So when I talk about growth, we measured the height and the diameter growth of the saplings. And yeah, the reasons could be that there's more stabilized, sapling most stabilized after the second wet season, and also could be because of improved weather conditions. Then certain tree species, which I'll be talking about in the later slide, have performed really well, and these are very important for the landscape and wildlife and hornbills. So, and the other thing that we came to know is that height may not be a great parameter to estimate growth, because there's a lot of herb which the saplings, they get browsed upon, and also the top part may dry up, and because of which the height may not give you a proper estimate for growth. We have also been following, we're trying to classify the saplings based on the survival. So based on the studies carried out by Divya Shankar in the Western Ghats, they've classified different species based on their performance. And in a way, this helps us to generate a specific species database. And based on that, we can plan our future restoration efforts. So in this site, many, like 6 species were showed excellent survival. So yeah, in a way, you can plan the the next restoration based on the monitoring. And these are the key species that I was talking about. So Cryptocarya, Disoxylum, Polyalthia, Aglaya, very important food plants for many birds and mammals in this landscape. So which were found to be very performing really well in terms of survival and growth, both. So now I like to hand it over to Aprajita, and I'd stop sharing my screen.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, actually, I should have gone to my slide long back. Wait. I'll have to go. We have the same presentation, but she's doing different parts. Can everyone hear me? Hello?
Yes, very well. Yes, very
Okay.
well.
Okay.
Yes, yes, we can.
Okay. Yeah. So basically, yeah. So Nupur has told you about our program itself in terms of how we started, what we've done till date. So like I pointed out earlier, and she has also, a proportion of the saplings that we grow in the nursery, we also provide to local people, and the household people. And the reasons are, firstly, like people are trying to buy a lot of these tree species outside from some local nurseries. And most of these local other nurseries have segun, that is teak, which is also considered valuable by people. But there are a number of other species in this area which are common native species, which are also important as timber. One of them, for instance, is this Aglaya spectabilis, which is a very, very important tree for hornbills, birds, as well as other mammals. And so there's many of these trees. So our idea is that if we are providing these to local people to grow in their home gardens, and it's like kind of like agroforestry or whatever, they're at least using those particular trees. Eventually they will cut them for their use maybe, but at least 25, 30 years later they might, I don't know, 15, 20 years also in some cases where the trees grow, but at least they won't go and cut it in the forest, you know in the primary forest or whatever, and degrade it further, the reserve forest. Also toko, what has happened to toko is that it's become very, very rare in the reserve forest. It's been harvested so much, it's amazing, but people will cut the entire tree to get the leaves of to thatch their houses. And actually the Nishi people now have realized the importance of growing toko. When I first came in 95, I used to be, they used to access it often from the park. This toko leaves, and toko leaves are so precious in Arunachal that it sells for 5 to 6 rupees, one leaf dried. And in some other communities in central Arunachal, people grow toko in their home gardens, and they don't need to put this ugly tin roofs and stuff. They have these leaves for thatch. And these leaves actually are like wonderful thatching for the whole season. Like, in the winters and summers, it's like stays good. With tin, yeah, sorry,
रोएगा तो सुनाई नहीं देगा मुझे.
with tin, what happens, I'm going off track a bit, but with tin, what happens is the houses are very too hot in summer and then too cold in winter. But anyway, so the point is there are several species like that which are very important locally for people. And but the problem we face often is that, like, we don't have enough. We can't grow at the scale that people want it. We had one guy who came to me insisting that, madam, aap humko 5,000, one particular species, give me 5,000, this Melina arborea, which is native to this place also, and it's found in many other parts of India. But I said, we don't have, like, come on, our entire number is this much. We may be able to, annually we grow about 6 to 8,000 saplings in our nursery till now. And so the kind of scale, the numbers that they want, we are not able to provide for many of the species. And I don't think we will be able to grow that many, given space and given the manpower and the staff that we have. But whatever it is, we've provided some. So initially when we were giving, we were also worried that, okay, these are just going and we don't know whether they'll be at all surviving. People will just, so we tried to monitor survival by going back to the households and checking on survival. So we have some data on that. And we started selling it at a nominal rate so that people will value it a bit more. The other thing is that we often, because we have a nursery right in the village there, everybody, a lot of people come to us to ask us for saplings for their local tree planting events. And I mean, largely a lot of people still see it as, like it's like a big advertisement people do, no, on all these wildlife days that we planted these many saplings. And, very often some of this eventually ends up being with those saplings dying. So, but we still, we never say no to all these requests because we feel it's good that people want our saplings and they're growing a variety of native species. So it could be from the district administration for their avenue plantation. It could be, the army or forest department for some. So, and that way people also start, and we engage in some conversations with them, right, about these things and about also protecting the saplings well so that they do survive and monitoring them. But often it doesn't really work out, but it's a work in progress. I mean, in terms of outreach and awareness, it's not really related to the restoration, but it's been a long-standing, dream of mine to produce a book on the trees of that area. And with one other colleague who's the actual botanist, taxonomist, Navendu, and another, researcher, we're producing a book on the lowland trees of Arunachal, Western Arunachal Pradesh. Hopefully it'll come out in April this year. And it's really been inspired a lot by Pradeep Kishan's wonderful book. I just adore that book, Jungle Trees of Central India. Ours will not be at all like close to that, but we are trying our best to do a good job as as much as possible. So hopefully that'll also, because there's no photographic field guide to the trees of this region, Northeast. There's lots of floras, and that's very difficult for common people. So we want to encourage a lot of people and visitors to these areas to be able to recognize and figure out some of the trees in this region. And of course, many of these trees are common to other parts of Northeast India. The other thing is we have a nature education program, which is with the local schools in the area. And that's a different program run by another colleague of mine. But what we also do is we try to link both this work also. Like, so a lot of the school children, we encourage them, we take them on these nursery visits, and they participate in taking care of the plants, learning about the nursery activities and about the species, and with our field staff and the researchers. Yeah, so learnings from our efforts so far. So we've understood, like a lot of the efforts have not been so fruitful. In some places you saw the survival was only 30%. After so much effort and cost, it feels, sometimes quite heartbreaking that it's not, and a lot of it, some of those factors were related to the natural mortality. In some of these wilderness areas, you can't, elephants, gaur, and other herbivores will browse on saplings and cause mortality, trampling. That happens. There have been a few accidents in some sites, like a site which was a restoration site, which was given by the forest department. But somehow people forgot that there's a restoration plot and the road was cleared through the plot, which resulted in some mortality, like Nupur said. The other is our problem with site accessibility and maintenance. Like this park or even the reserve forest areas, everything, it's very hilly, and most of it is hilly, and and there are no roads, like motorable roads, right? So in many places we have to sometimes actually carry we've had to carry, like, up to a certain point we transport it in vehicles, and then we have to carry the saplings, actually. So that's a problem. And then because the monsoon is pretty long here from May to August, but the planting season is essentially between May to July or May to June. We have to do our planting when it's still accessible, because afterwards we cannot, access some of these sites. And then sometimes you might want to visit it a few months after planting to check and maintain. But sometimes there's a problem because the roads will not open till later in the drier season. Also, till now we've mostly had sort of informal understandings and partnerships. We haven't had really a formal partnership established with any of the people who are the landowners, or whether it's the forest department, or if it's the privately owned tea estates or the farmland areas. So that's caused a problem in one site where in 2019, when we tried to do a restoration in this farmland area. Initially, we thought it's great because it's a clear private owner. But what happened is during the COVID, last year during COVID, there was one incident of a herd of elephants coming and destroying most of our saplings, it seems, and our staff and none of us could go because there was lockdown. And then eventually the owner decided to replant that area with whatever, various horticulture, trees or so it's a big loss for us. It's like so much effort has gone into doing that and then it's gone. So it's very disheartening at times. And like I've said, site-based logistic challenges, like even to plant, sometimes in the reserve forest, we've tried to plant saplings around the hornbill nest trees, which are highly degraded in the reserve forest. It's quite open because of logging. So our nest protectors, hornbill nest protectors, sometimes have had to carry saplings like this. So it seems quite hard and difficult, to do it at scale. So in one of the sites, we had to walk quite a distance to individually transport saplings. Then we're also we don't have so much infrastructure, our own large vehicles to transport, saplings inside in the forests or these areas. So we also rely quite a bit on the forest department to help us, in transporting. So that also becomes an issue. I'll just play another video, which is just a video taken by one of our nursery staff who is actually being trained in Green Hub. Mostly the videos are by him, I think, and it's been put together. We're trying to make a short film on our restoration work. It's not yet complete, but these are some videos stitched together by Nupur to show our nursery and our staff at work. Yeah. Oops. Wait. The screen thing. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, the challenges are quite large sometimes. We have a small team, which is because of how many people can we manage as well as pay and all that. And in terms of managing staff and our transportation needs, those are of course the more minor challenges. Ensuring better survival in the wild, we can do weeding. That's the only thing that we can do and we keep doing properly. But whereas we can't control for all these other factors, including disturbances, like Nupur mentioned, in a couple of the reserve forest sites, people chopped the saplings in some places. So, the survival declined there. This issue that we've kept on bringing up about land ownership and governance may not be clear to many of you, but Basically in Arunachal, a large percentage of the area is 65% of the forest area. Forest area itself is very large. 82% of the total geographical area of Arunachal is under forest cover. Well, now it's 78%. But basically of that, the forest area, 65% is in this category called unclassed state forest or community forest, and unlike Nagaland and Manipur, where community forest is clearly community forest, and in that people have clear-cut land ownership, like papers and all that. Here it's more de facto. So people, for all practical purposes, it is owned by the different tribes and people. Their land, people know what their areas are in the unclassed forest, but on paper, it is also owned by the forest department. So it'll be also shown in forest department records. But it's not so much of a problem in the unclassed state forest because it's more clearly managed by people. And actually, that's why the condition of some of the community forest is much better. But in the RF, the reserve forest, it is actually supposed to be owned by the forest department and managed by the forest department. But for various reasons, especially many of the reserve forests all in this lowland belt, in this crucial, critical foothill forest, which is very important for wildlife, a lot of these areas are under threat and pressure from many factors, including conversion to agriculture, conversion to plantations, illegal logging. And often it's very hard for the forest department to check all the issues and control. And department, apart from that, they don't have whatever but also people claim those areas, and that is the issue even in our area. So therefore, because of that, it's very hard to do restoration in some of these areas, because even if we do it, we are not sure of the ultimate outcome and the protection, right? Also, there's a problem, like suppose we talk to some land, like local villagers, and they say, okay, this is the site where you can do restoration, and they will agree to protect it. But then the forest department worries that if that happens, there might be people can say it's our area, we planted here or something like that, and if we do it with the forest department and they give us a site where we will do the restoration, if the local people don't agree, then also it's a problem. Yeah, so basically that is the trying to find partnerships which work across these different groups will be important. And of course, funding is an issue. And I often also worry that our efforts are very, very small in relation to the scale of destruction, that can happen, that is happening. So yeah, but it's better late than never. And at least the trees grow fast in this area. So many of our sites, we do see, I mean, at least even when I'm 70, 80, I hope that I'll be able to see some good patches which we've restored. May not be very large scale, but so we have a lot of plans in the future. Nupur joined us in 2018, and she is the one who now day to day like looks after the nursery as well as the restoration project. And so we have a lot of plans of growing a wider range of species, because till now we've focused on trees. And this is a point that Pradeep talked about in his talk, and which is something that we really think also we need to look at. We've not and I've come to know a lot, we've not really learned so much about the shrubs and the climbers and lianas in this system. A lot of the vegetation studies at my earlier ones have always focused more on the trees. But thanks to the book we are doing, I've come to know a lot more shrubs and lianas, and many of them are also important for several, a lot of wildlife. We're also, like, we do a lot of small studies in the nursery as well as in the sites to understand better. Um, to scale up our effort, we are going to be trying passive restoration in a few sites in Nameri Tiger Reserve and in Pake Tiger Reserve, where we want to be, there are a lot of degraded patches where it's just fully covered by weeds. And we actually wanted to do it last year, But last year, due to COVID, we could not do it. But we've identified some patches where, larger patches, where we want to see by weed clearing whether the natural suppressed regeneration will come up. So that will help us scale up in terms of area also, where we might do some supplemental planting, but where it won't be like a fully active restoration effort. Um, there's also some talk of trying to facilitate some workshops for Northeast Youth Network. Recently, there's some conversations, and we hope to try to improve this partnership with the local community and forest department, territorial especially, so that it's more clear cut, and we can actually find better sites which can be protected. Um, we're also trying to build up a database on the plants and the manual of best practices for this area and relation to our species. In terms of suggestions, oh, just sorry, I'm getting a call. Just a minute, there's some, um, just, oh God, wait. So we try to, okay, so this is already, I saw Divya Sridhar's talk and I saw that they've given detailed suggestions. And maybe it's presumptuous of me to give suggestions. I'm sure you guys already know many things. But I would really again say that, to encourage the use of native plant species. And of course, ecological restoration may be very different. And the costs and efforts that we do, like in our efforts, is very high. And it may not be as expected in terms of a cost benefit analysis, but it is still necessary, and of course, the biggest challenge is to protect. So like I'm saying that, when you have projects, the landscape architects in different areas, maybe in urban areas or in campuses, it'd be nice if you could retain and protect existing large trees or whatever, as well as some remnant natural forest patches. And also try and encourage the use of native plant species. So for instance, in the northeastern region, and some of these species are common in other parts of India also, like many of you will be familiar with Adinanthera pavonina, then Kadam, Neolamakia, Kadamba, Alstonia scholaris, Chatiana, but Erythrina. But these are also found in the sites where we work. And these have beautiful flowers. Many of them have beautiful fruits, so, and some of them are fast growing, like Duabanga grandiflora, which is so so many species use, come to it for nectar. And I'll just have to tell this, wait, can I just stop 1 second? Shirsha, I'm in a meeting right now. I'm sorry, I'm in a talk. Can you call Charu? Yeah, I'm in the middle of a talk. Sorry, I can't. I'm in the middle of a talk. Yeah, sorry. So, yeah, sorry for the interruption. Actually, there's some guests at home. So just coming to the last slide, acknowledgements, and there have been various people who have helped us in this effort. And yeah, so this is just to acknowledge and I just wanted to say that the tea estate thing came out of as an opportunistic thing, because some of them approached us. And although it's not in a wilderness setting, it's in Assam, in the nearby area, the tree species, the native tree species composition is similar to what occurs in that region locally. Those areas are just like less than 50 kilometers or, as the crow flies. So we also provided, as the, Nupur spoke, saplings there, because we thought it'd be nice to have some patches in these tea estates, which are, have native species growing, as sort of maybe refuge for birds and other wildlife. So this is our staff. A lot of, a lot of our day-to-day work really relies on them. And many of them have a lot of knowledge of the tree species in the area, and some of them have worked with us for 10 years or more. and so they're very important to the work. A lot of different researchers and people have been involved in the effort from when we started in 2014. Most of the people in this picture are not with the program anymore, but they provided critical, and crucial, they did some critical work during different stages. One of them is Rohit, who has really helped us in the last so many years and Amruta, who was it was part of her idea to begin this as part of the extension of the Nest Adoption Program. So we just wanted to acknowledge all of them. And then there's the team of 11 Hornbill nest protectors who also are involved with us in the restoration activities and planting. And many times they grumble about this work of, carrying saplings and trying to plant this. So that was it.
Okay, thank you, speakers. Before I open the house for question and answers, I would kind of let everyone know that it's been such a great thing by Aparajita ma'am that she's been informing us because of few typo errors. The talk has been getting ups and downs for a long time now, and also the technical glitches that we had in the beginning. But overall, a great effort, and it's such a overwhelming thing to understand such a hard work that you guys are doing, and is so much to know and learn about how forest behaves. And we really are thankful to both Nupur and Aparajita ma'am. Thank you for giving us your time. And with your permission, I can open the house for the question answers. People can just put in their questions in the chat box and I can sequence them out. Thank you. Yeah, Somil, I guess you can start, please. You'll have to unmute yourself, please. Is there an issue? If you can type the question, I can read it out. So Somil wants to know about the grasses in the region. He wants to know if there is any mention of grasses in the region.
Hello, Somil.
Yeah, hi. I think his mic has some issue.
Okay. Yeah. So actually, that's an interesting question. So there are, small patches of riverine grassland in Pake, in some areas, and there are many grass species. But actually, I'm very sorry to tell you that I hardly know much about the grasses. I know the names of some species. There's saccharum, there is Phragmites, there are a few others. But it's very, very small patches in some stretches. And there's been one study in Pake on the grasslands of Pake. If you're interested and I have your email, I can try and find that study and share it with you later.
Okay, the second question he has is Nupu's question about tree spacing confused him. She said something about local site factors determining that spacing. What does that mean?
Okay. Hi, Somil. Sorry if I wasn't clear. So what I meant is that the spacing between the saplings is decided on the site factors, as in the number of species or the placement of the species, naturally regenerating species in those areas, if there are any. So based on that, we decide on the spacing between the saplings that are about to be planted. So if there's lots of regenerating saplings, so based on that, the spacing will differ. But if there is no regenerating saplings at the site, then mostly we follow around 2 meter distance between the saplings when planting. I hope that clears your question.
Yeah, so I think you had mentioned about the jungle trees of central India. That's the book that you recommended, right? I think one of
Yeah.
the speakers would want, one of the participants wanted to understand the same. Is Jungle Trees of Central India by Pradeep Krishan, right?
Yes, yes. Yeah, he can. It's by Pradeep Krishan, who's present here. He can tell you more about it, of course. It is, if you just type Jungle Trees of Central India, it's available on Amazon, for sale. So I think it's also available online as a PDF.
Yeah, it's definitely available on Amazon. Thank you for reconfirming the same. So Somil again here, and he has a question that how did you initiate this relationship with the FD?
Oh, so, I've been working in that area since 95 in Arunachal, not just this site, but other areas. And so there's a long history of working here. And since we already had research projects in this area from a long time, then I also had started this hornbill nest adoption program. So it is relationships built with individual officers and based on our work in all those years. So yeah, so that's how these conversations and relationships start. And of course, there are differences between different officers or people, right? So sometimes we've been very fortunate that in Pake Tiger Reserve, there's been an officer for many years who was very, very receptive to and encouraging of many, many different conservation activities as well as researchers. So that helped us.
Somil, hope it clarifies your questions. So one question I have, ma'am, this is Shwetal. Can you just tell us a little more about your book, Walk the Rainforest with? Uh,
Oh, that book. Oh, I wrote that long back in 2004. So it was, it was in partnership with Katha. So it's been published by Katha. So it was meant as a book for introducing children to the rainforest. After that, we've also produced some other educational books for children. I have one book called the Hornbill for Hornbills, a coloring and activity book. Then I also have another book which is called The Secrets of the Rainforest, which is a nature activity book for children in Northeast. Those two were published by NCF, so we have copies available at NCF. But that Walk the Rainforest was done with was published by Katha. So unfortunately, I don't know whether it's still available for sale online on Amazon, whether copies are available. Yeah, I mean, I don't know what more you want to know about it. So it was done with an artist who made these nice, illustrations to capture the rainforest of Arunachal. And I wrote it with another colleague, the text.
Right. Thank you so much. I actually happened to see it a couple of times in the school of my in the library of my school kids, and
Okay.
that's how I remembered it. But just wanted to know, it was so nice to know such books are written to initiate the thought of this need. So see this aspect in the kids. So that is what I wanted to really understand, that do you still continue to do that, or it was, well, what was the motivation behind the book?
That book. Yeah, I mean,
uh,
it was,
yeah,
so
the books for the kids,
okay.
especially. Yeah,
Yeah, because although I'm not an expert on nature education, it has been a part of our conservation program throughout, almost from the beginning. But it had not been very formalized. often, nature education is done as an additional component by many people, when they work at a site with people or engage with conservation. So we have produced educational material. We've produced posters, we've produced other stuff, and these books. But in fact, recently, one of my colleagues has produced a coloring book of wildlife of Pake. But an NCF has a lot of educational material. You can check that out on NCF's website in our other program called Education and Public Outreach. But as part of the Eastern Himalaya program, we've always done a bit of nature education in all the sites where we work locally. But from 2017, we began a more formal nature education program with a colleague who sort of trained people. This Dr. Pranav Trivedi, who's sort of done nature education in other places. We began a more, how will I say, a structured program, establishing schools, nature clubs in these local schools. And by taking all the children in those local schools to the park, to the wilderness and all that, in camps where they spend, to get them to connect with their local wildlife and nature and appreciate that. Because often we've seen that, even the local children do not actually, they will talk about toucan or, a lion or something which they don't see in their area, but they'll not know that there's so much of stuff, even in their backyards, which to appreciate. So that's the reason why we've done it. And yeah, so we still engage with nature education. And one of my other colleagues, she sort of coordinates a full-fledged nature education program in the area. I just noticed that today there were very few people at the talk. I mean, there's 37 people. So I guess you're understanding that Saturday there'll be more people actually, because the last two talks, there was about more than 80 people, I think. So I guess maybe.
True. So we don't really know the reason. But anyways, it was really nice to know about all these nature education talks, and probably we'll get in touch with you over emails on this. So there's one more question by Abhinaya. Can you ask your question, please, Abhinaya?
Yeah, hi. This is Abhinaya. It's a very amazing talk, Parajita, very inspiring to see the work that you're doing in these very challenging terrain. I just had a question about how do you think, I want to know your thoughts on how we can increase the scale of eco-restoration across India. I mean, considering the many destructive projects that are being planned by the government, and also like how can we bring eco-restoration into the mainstream conservation discourse and practice across ecosystems across the country?
Very difficult question.
I know.
It's a question that I think my colleagues, Divya, Sridhar, others also grapple with.
Yes.
Yeah, because once we do it, we realize that, okay, it's something nice and exciting that what we have done. We've established a nursery, we've done this, but in terms of what is needed or what could be done, it's still like a drop in the ocean. And one of the, I don't know, I mean, I'm always optimistic, but at least a glimmer of hope in our area is that we are increasingly finding a lot of, so, there's this Green Hub. Have you heard of it? Green Hub
Yes,
network.
Green Hub, Rita
Yes,
Banerjee.
yeah, exactly. So Grita's in fact recently got together with some of us trying to have conversations on, among her youth network, the Northeast Youth Network, there are lots of people,
Yes.
individuals as well as some local NGOs who want to do these activities, like, like it may be, I don't know how they'll be scaled, but maybe it's like a multiple such efforts in different areas is the way to go.
Okay.
But I don't know, because that again is probably, I think where we are failing really, which is what Pradeep talks about, is that, we have these big targets. The government has so many targets for the Bond Challenge and all these 50 million hectares and all that. And this Campa, which is also again done in a incorrect way, maybe I would say. We are not able to sort of have those conversations where, we can actually have the government and the agency which has the scale, the manpower, the funds and the ability to sort of use, take back the principles of eco-restoration or the learnings from these small scale efforts to use it in practice in the larger areas. Right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The other way is this small way where we are trying to now, Nupur and I want to do training, or with help of Divya and Sridhar also try to do. There's people in Shergaon Forest Division in Western Arunachal who have approached me. Then there's others in other parts of Assam. So it's possible that maybe we can encourage others to sort of start their initiatives. But though, I mean, what I'm saying is that is one way. The other is trying to engage with the authorities more, and
Okay.
people who have, where we should be able to dovetail these two, no, so that it can be at
Combined.
scale.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you again. And yes, these talks will be available on ISOLA websites once we are done with it. I would request Aditya to just, share his thoughts. Uh,
I'd just like to say this was a fascinating talk. I don't want you guys to think that because there weren't many people here, it wasn't a success. I loved your talk, Parijita and Nupur. I was amazed at your methodical way of going about restoration, the range of things that you covered, the nurseries, the teaching, acknowledgements of all your staff, how you managed to identify and record how these species were growing. Very methodical, scientific, and humanistic. And it's, very interesting and informative. And I really do appreciate your coming here and explaining to us. It's very inspiring. So thank you so much for that. I really do appreciate it.
Thank
So,
you. Thank you for the opportunity. Yeah.
we've learned so much. I think there was so much learning here for us as landscape architects and also just people who are interested in the environment. So this is a wonderful, wonderful session. And I also just want to encourage everyone else to keep attending these talks. We're going to have some wonderful talks coming up. That Paul Blanche Flowers is going to say. He's in Oroville and he's a horticulturalist who has covered all parts of Tamil Nadu and other parts of Andhra as well, on old industrial sites. And then Suprabha Station later, Wenard, she's doing her work there. So the next Wednesday, the Wednesday and the Saturday coming up next week, we are going to be having the last two concluding talks. I appreciate everyone taking their time on a Saturday evening and attending these. And thank you again, Aparajita and Nupur, for being here with us today and sharing your knowledge and wisdom. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks. All right.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you all for attending. Good night. Thank you, Pradeep.
Bye.
Pradeep,
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
You want to say something?
I think he's not connected. He got disconnected, maybe.
Okay, thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you all. Bye.
Good night. Good night. Bye-bye. Good night. Bye-bye. Good night.
Bye. Good night.
Bye.